Hey there, this is Jonathan Duvall on the Roku Developer Relations team. Today we're going to be talking all about the Roku Resource Monitor. In just a few minutes, Jeff Dunn, a senior software engineer here at Roku, is going to explain how the Roku Resource Monitor helps developers optimize their channel's performance by tracking and visualizing their channel's resource consumption. Jeff's going to review the public ECP commands that power the tool and dive into the various resource usage metrics in the UI. Jeff is then going to launch a side-loaded channel on his Roku device and demonstrate how the tool works. After Jeff is done, we'll do a live Q&A session where Jeff will be joined by the Roku engineering team to answer your questions, which you can submit in Slido. The Slido link for this webinar is goroku.com/rrm-webinar-QA. The link to the Slido is in the webinar registration form, and it's in the Zoom chat. Now, once you ask a question, your fellow attendees will upvote or downvote it, which will help determine whether it gets read on air. Now, please be aware that we will not comment on our roadmap or make other forward-facing commitments during the Q&A. We always do welcome feature requests and other suggestions around what would help make Roku developer tools better. If you have to leave early or you want to share this session, we will post a recording of it on the Roku Developers YouTube channel, Roku Developer Video Portal, and the Roku Developers channel. So, without further ado, let's get started. Jeff Dunn, everyone.
Thank you, Jonathan. As Jonathan mentioned, we are here to talk about the Roku Resource Monitor. So let's go ahead and get into it. So today we're going to talk about why to use the Roku Resource Monitor and what it does for you. And also the data that the Resource Monitor displays is all available from the device via ECP APIs, HTTP. We'll talk about those. And we'll look at some static shots of the user interface of the monitor, and then we'll go into a demonstration. And then finally, we'll have some Q&A. So why use the Roku Resource Monitor? The Roku Resource Monitor, primarily its goal is to help you have the best possible channel you can have, the best possible experience for your users. So you can look at the time series of these resources, the resource usage in your channel, the various types of resources, and we'll talk about what types of resources are displayed, of course. But over time, you can see what changes, and you can correlate those to various events, either user events or other events that your channel is handling. And then you can hopefully, if you see problems, you can then figure out why you're seeing those problems and diagnose them and fix them. And the other beauty of Roku Resource Monitor is that the logs can be saved. And so you can save a session log, you can review it later, see if you've improved, see if the channel has improved, if you do have a problem. You can also share that with other team members or other teams. For instance, the QA department may run this. If they see a problem, they can send a log off to engineering and hopefully help resolve any problem they may have found. So what do you need to run Roku Resource Monitor? Obviously, you need a Roku device. It needs to be loaded with Roku OS 11.5 or later. Channel developer mode must be enabled. You have to have a workstation, either OS X, Windows, or Linux. This is not a web app, so you actually have to download and run it. And last but not least, in your channel, you have to have run as process equals 1 in the channel manifest. So Roku Resource Monitor has two real modes of operation. One is the live mode, where you're monitoring the active or a suspended channel. So you can see what your channel is doing while it's running, while it's suspended over a significant period of time. It will work on the side-loaded channel. It'll also work on a channel that's been downloaded from the channel store if the device is keyed and the channel store channel is signed with the same key that's on the device. You can also monitor that channel. So you can monitor your actual production channel. And then again, as we mentioned, it's got this file mode where you can save a session, come back, load it in later, and re-examine that data. So one of the things that we've done is that the data that's displayed in Roku Resource Monitor is actually available from the device via ECP APIs delivered via XML. So you can, if you have existing tools, you can integrate some of this data into your tools, or you can write new tools if you want to monitor these pieces of data. They're all this data is available, and actually some additional data is available. You can also go into a web browser or curl or wget and hit that URL, and there are various options on these commands that you can get additional data or different data. And again, that's all publicly documented, so I recommend looking at the public documentation. So what is the data that it returns? Memory use is a big one, definitely tracks that. System memory use, also graphics memory used by the channel, CPU used by the channel, the scene graph node count. One thing I've mentioned here is the RSG node rendezvous. They're not tracked in Roku Resource Manager. I'm sorry, Roku Resource Monitor. But I mention it because it's a common ask from developers. They want a way to automate getting data about the scene graph node rendezvous and making them available via ECP and HTTP is just an easier way to automate than the current data, which is available on port 8080 Telnet. It's the same data, it's just available via HTTP now, make it much easier to automate. That's the last I'm going to mention about that, but again, it's all documented. The command is SG rendezvous. Go look it up if you're interested in tracking that kind of data. So let's get into a little bit of the UI here. So what does Roku Resource Monitor do for you? So this is a live panel, and what I've done is I've included some static snapshots here of the UI because it's easier to talk about it while it's not moving and running. So we'll just talk about these static images and then we'll go into a demo. Excuse me. So memory usage, we give you a lot of data here about memory usage. Used memory is all of the memory that's actually physically used on the device. And that's a combination of this resident and swap. Swap actually on a Roku device, it never swaps to a persistent or non-volatile memory. It's actually a ZRAM disk. And there is documentation on the web as well if you want to look into some more details on this. The next thing that's probably the most interesting is this anonymous memory. This is memory that your channel actually allocates. So if you do a create object, you get anonymous memory. It's just whatever your channel allocates will show up as anonymous. This is the one your channel has by far the most control over. A file back memory is things that are read in from a file. So for instance, BrightScript bytecode that's read from a file and executed in memory is going to be file backed, and shared memory is memory that's potentially shared among multiple processes. We're not going to a lot more detail here. This can get fairly involved. The thing, you can find all of the information on all of these things on the web. Well, through various places you can do some research into what these various things mean. But the thing to take away is that the used memory has the most impact on channel performance. And the thing that you have the most direct control of in your channel is the anonymous memory. And as you see this tooltip here, you can hover over, and this is true of all the panels, you can hover over any particular point in the current time series and see the breakdown of all the various pieces of data. You can also change, and we'll show this, we'll show it live, you can change the values that you might want to display. So let's go into graphics memory. So the graphics memory is obviously, when you load posters in particular, they use graphics memory in the GPU to display those on the screen. The really important thing here is if you look at system memory, right here, system memory is textures that have been loaded but not necessarily displayed. So if you see a large amount of system memory, it may be you're loading posters you're not using, and that can be considered a memory leak. So if you see a big number there, you probably want to take a look at it. CPU usage, fairly straightforward. So one of the important things to note here is this is the total CPU usage across all cores on a multi-core machine. If it says 100%, all cores are busy, and that channel will not perform well if it's got a high level of memory use. And scene graph metrics. So one of the things that this tracks just the raw number of scene graph nodes used by your channel. And probably the most important thing to look at here, and we'll look at it in the demo, is making sure this number doesn't just keep creeping up, but this is just the number of nodes that your channel uses. That said, let's now do a demonstration. So I've got Roku Resource Monitor loaded here, and I have a live image of my Roku Express. So I've got my Roku Express here that is my favorite for this demo anyway. All my devices work, but this is the one I choose to use today. Select that device, and now it will tell me the channels on that device that I'm allowed to monitor. Again, and on this device, I have not keyed the device, so it's just only the dev channel that I can monitor. The video ads channel is the video ads channel that is available publicly as our standard set of demonstration channels. So we'll go in and we'll see what it basically it's a simple channel that allows you to browse and play video, incorporates Roku ads framework. The one thing I've added to that demo is support for instant resume. I just mentioned that because if you download the channel, it won't have instant resume support. So, but we will demo instant resume support as part of the monitoring session. So let's go ahead and say we want to monitor that channel. And I personally really like the info bars at the top here. These are really handy. This tells me I've got what my device is, what channel I'm monitoring, the firmware version, channel version. I just find this to be really handy. So let me increase the font size here. So one of the nice things is that you can say, okay, I'm going to start a session here in a sec, but one of the things that's interesting is you can change the interval. So default is 1 second. If you're doing a really long session, like you want to do a multi-hour session, you might want to make this a little longer just to keep the data set a little smaller. But we're going to stick with 1 second for now. And I'm going to say start session. And you'll see immediately time starts marching, right? And of course, everything's a 0 because my channel's not running. One of the nice things about this is you can monitor from before you launch the channel and continue monitoring after you exit the channel. And the beauty of that is you can catch every single bit of data about the performance of your channel from start to finish. There's no race condition at the start of the channel per se. So let's just go ahead so I'm looking at channel memory usage. A couple things interesting here is I can move these tabs around, right? I can change the order of these things. If I grab it here, I can change the order of them to whatever order I want. I find memory usage is usually one of the biggest concerns for most channels. So we're going to keep memory usage at the top here. There we go. So now let's go ahead and launch the channel. And there's our dev channel. And as it launches, you see I'm getting actual data in the resource monitor. As I mentioned, I can hover and get the exact pieces of data that I want to see. I can choose to look at some memory or in all these graphs, and I'm only going to show it on this one to avoid some tedium. But for instance, I can say, I know that the two things that I'm most concerned about are, used memory, which really affects performance, and then anonymous memory is the one that I have the most control over. So I'm going to say, I just want to see those two for now. And there you go. Which it makes sense. The CPU is fairly flat because I'm not doing anything with my channel. The memory usage is fairly flat because I'm not doing anything with my channel. That's what you would hope and expect. So let's look at some of these other panels. So graphics memory, again, we're using some graphics memory, a little bit of system memory, so probably not leaking too much there. CPU usage. Oh, let me go ahead and decrease my zoom level. So my zoom level here, what it does is it changes the width of the displayed field. So I'm displaying out to 8 minutes here so that we can see the entire history of this channel. So as we can see, if we look at channel graphics memory usage, again, we were running as soon as we launched, it went up, it's set, it's flat. Channel CPU usage, again, on start, it spiked, then dropped down to basically 0. Scene graph metrics, fairly flat. This is also what you want to see. You don't want to see things that the channel is just sitting here, see these things increase. So let's scroll around a little bit and see what happens. I'm now browsing. And you can see, for instance, my scene graph metrics go up. Makes sense as I display more data on the screen. CPU, again, as I scroll around, I can see CPU go up a little bit. And as I would expect, I would hope just browsing wouldn't use too much CPU, and that's the case. I'm using only 4 or 5% of the CPU. If I go back to system memory usage, as I browse around, I use a little more memory. How about we play some video and see what happens? Let's look at channel testing here. And I'm going to hit play. And this channel is enabled with RAF, so I'm seeing ads. And I used a little more memory when I started playing. When I should mention these memory limits, some devices will show you the limits. It depends on the hardware, some won't. In general, these limits, you want to stay well away from them, because if you hit them, your channel may be killed. The foreground limit is when your channel is actively running, as this one is. Background limit applies to a suspended channel. And we will suspend this channel in a minute just to see what happens there. Graphics memory has gone up a little btle bit. So this is kind of what you'd expect from a well-behaved channel. You know, you do something new, you start doing like playback, and you start using a few more resources. What'll get more interesting as we go through the life cycle of this channel. You'll see some of these graphs actually do more interesting things. But just looking at, again, CPU usage while we were browsing, we started playing, we saw some CPU usage, never to a dramatic extent. This probably never slowed down the channel. And our scene graph. So you notice my video stopped there. And the nice thing that I see here is that I used some nodes while I was playing video, quit playing video, and I gave the nodes back. Memory usage has stayed fairly flat. It's crept up a little bit. Again, this is the graphics memory. So the graphics memory, because it's a cache, you don't have a lot of control over this. What's a concern, again, is if you're looking for leaks here, and we don't seem to be using any more system memory that's not turning into actual posters on the screen. Again, memory usage went up while we were doing some playback, and then it dropped back down again. So let's now press home. So I'm going to press the home button, and because this channel is enabled for instant resume, it will suspend the channel. So I'm going to say home, and you'll see that it gave up some memory. Sorry, get my cursor out of the way there. So you'll see it gave up some memory, and now it's thoroughly flat. In the background, it should be flat. So this is something to think about. If your channel does support instant resume, you want to try to give up some resources while it's resumed to enable your channel, to enable the device to perform better overall. Our graphics memory usage dropped to 0 while a channel is suspended. It can't display anything, so that's good to know. CPU usage, again, on exit, we got a little bit of a spike and then flat again. And this is also nice that it gave back a few nodes, so we've got fewer nodes on the screen. So one thing that's interesting is that this is let's look at the nodes here. Let's follow the nodes. I'm going to relaunch the channel, and you'll notice that because it's an instant resume channel, it does restart very quickly. Bam, and there's my channel. And you see that here it's using more scene graph nodes again. It's what you'd expect. CPU usage went up again while it was went up to 29%, it looks like. Sorry, I can't quite grab that, but I don't want to change the zoom at this moment. So you see that the CPU usage spiked a little bit to about 30%. That seems reasonable very briefly. And we started using graphics memory again. And obviously our channel system memory also increased a bit when we resumed. So one thing, the interesting thing to note here, again, because we've run this channel for a couple of minutes, looks like, well, 7 minutes, 6 minutes maybe. This is really kind of what you want to see. If you look at it, all these graphs are fairly flat, right? So one of the things you can do is perhaps hit home again to suspend it. We'll come back in. We'll launch it again. And you see our memory usage in particular is pretty flat, right? And that's really what you want to see is over time, you don't want to see these things creeping up. That's one of the problems that we see with some channels, in particular with memory. Memory and scene graph nodes. Often, you know, if you run for a period of time, these things will creep up and creep up and creep up, but eventually they'll impact channel performance. So I really recommend doing a long session with this, like 8 or 12 hours. Start it streaming and go home and come back 12 hours later, or in a lab or whatever, and just look to make sure that these numbers stay relatively flat. If you see any of these graphs slowly creeping up, and the primary ones that tend to do that with some channels is memory and scene graph nodes. So let's look back again with our CPU usage. It's flat. That's good. Scene graph, same thing. Like all these are pretty flat. Right now, this is a short demo, of course. So I recommend, you know, having a longer session, either playing with it or just letting it stream for many hours. Because, you know, we all want, I think every channel developer really wants people to sit in their channel for significant periods of time, you know, multiple hours, streaming videos, browsing, streaming videos. So this can really help you find those long-term problems where you're slowly leaking nodes or memory. So now I'm going to press back. So one thing that's interesting about this, I'm going to go back up to memory usage, system memory usage. So again, this has been pretty flat. You know, we started up, we did some things, but it stayed pretty flat, which is a good thing. But one thing you'll notice is this segment in here is when we suspended and then we resumed, right? So this is how we know it was suspended, right? And also I think I suspended here as well. So in the second little dip right there, and that's how I know my channel was suspended, because it continued to use memory, use some resources. Now I'm going to press back, and this channel, it kills that will kill the channel. So now we've exited the channel, and now all our usage has dropped to 0 because the channel is no longer suspended. So everything should have gone to 0, all zeros, 0, 0, 0. Our channel is now dead. Okay, so now say we want to save this session. So all I do is I hit end session, and I can have the option here to say I want to go straight to the PC, but it also has this neat feature where I can just say end the session, and it stores it in the application history. It's only on this device. It doesn't store it on the web. So you can say history, and here are my previous sessions for this channel. I can reload them later, then file mode. So for instance, I can come over here to file mode, and I'm going to go ahead and change mode. That's fine. Open history and say I want to look at this one, and now I can look at my session again. There's all my data. Now I do want to say I want to save this, right? I say history, and I want to download that session, and now I did put it in my downloads folder. So, and then of course I can go to in file mode. I can say browse, and I can load. I don't have to load it. Don't have to load it out of history, and then in RRM I can browse. I can load it from any file that's been previously saved from Roku Resource Manager. One little tip here, which is pretty handy, is if you don't like this idea, if it's not convenient for you to want to save within the channel, you just want to download the PC every time, there's an option here. There are some really useful options here in settings, but I just press the settings button, come in here to session, and I can say, okay, I just want to download it to my PC every time. I don't want to And you can turn off warnings and that kind of thing. But I find this feature is pretty handy. If you just always want to download it to your PC, it just kind of removes one step on terminating a session. So that concludes our demo. So I will hand this back to Jonathan to MC our Q&A. I'm going to go ahead and answer the question, and
Okay.
and we can turn the video on in a minute. So there is a command, and an ECP command called sgnodes. So I don't know if you know about, there's a port 8080 command sgnodes. It provides the same information, but via ECP, you can say query sgnodes/all, and that will give you all of the nodes in your channel. Resource Monitor doesn't do that because it's just too much data to download constantly. So if you see it happening, you can use that command while your channel is running live to get a list of all the nodes. So you can use that. And unfortunately, every channel is different. So sometimes, unfortunately, it can be a little difficult to figure out which nodes are the problem. You have to know how the channel behaves, what you do, what the channel does. And for instance, if you have a lot of a certain type of node that you should only have a few of, then that would be a good clue. But it's the query sgnodes command available at ECP that you can use to help diagnose which nodes are being leaked.
Let's see. All right, got a couple questions from Brian. So can one thread be at 100% CPU usage? So on a 4-core CPU, 25% could be a source of an issue?
So certainly that can be an issue. Right now we don't provide the per core information, but that could, yes, that could be an issue, as it could be on any platform.
Excellent.
And how to diagnose it? Basically, you have to know your channel and what it's doing and figure out why it's doing that. I mean, typically you would see a performance penalty. You'd actually see something in the behavior of your channel. If it's pegged at 25% and you're seeing behavior problems, then I would look into this. But again, you have to know how your channel works, what it's doing, to be able to really figure out what's going on.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Brian, I accidentally just removed your previous question. Can you enter your question back in again? I'm so sorry. Now, good, we've got you guys on video. One second. Brian had a very profound question. I accidentally deleted it, which I feel awful about. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Brian. So Brian asks, how do you get foreground and background memory limits, and why do some devices not have it? So, I mean, basically depends on most of the newer devices actually will provide the foreground and background memory limits. Some of the older devices that don't, they'll just display NA. So it has something to do with the number of kernels on the devices.
Yeah, that's about all I have to add. We have so many different devices out there. Some support it and some don't right now. Support may roll out to different devices in the future. So we don't really have a stated set of devices that at the current time that support the presenting those limits via RRM.
Okay. So Marcelo asks, the profiler tool has a device monitoring tab. How different is this from that?
Well, that is a very good question. The two tools work very well together. So the profiler, it provides much more, it focuses on mostly memory usage and then CPU. And it's just a lot more, it gives you a lot more detail on those two things. Roku Resource Monitor provides you kind of a global view of your channel. And really what you would do is, coming back to some of those previous questions of how do you diagnose some of these issues, if you see an issue, you can then use the profiler to collect more data and try to figure out where your memory leaks are, for instance, using the profiler. Roku Resource Monitor won't give you that level of information of where the allocations are being done, where the memory might be leaked. It just gives you the raw number, gives you some actionable data so that you can go back and use other tools like the profiler to help diagnose and solve the problem.
Excellent. So are the memory limits included in the responses from the ECP commands?
Yes, they are.
Okay. So, good question from Marcelo. Can we use the profiler on key channels or only side-loaded? And I mean, it's side-loaded channels and then key channels that are associated with your developer account. So in theory, you could use it in a sideload environment, beta, or production. And beta production, but you just
Jonathan, sorry, sorry if I can interrupt you. So that's true of the resource monitor. That's not true of the profiler.
Okay.
And one of the reasons is the profiler requires that you change the manifest of your channel. Right. And it actually can have a significant impact on the performance of your channel. One of the things with Roku Resource Monitor is we did design it so it has absolutely minimal impact on the channel and device performance, overall performance. The profiler definitely has impact. It generates a tremendous amount of data, which can be exceedingly helpful, but it can slow your channel down. It will affect channel performance. Potentially even could. If you have race conditions, it may change the behavior of your channel. We haven't seen much of that, but it's a possibility. But again, right now there's no way to profile the channel from the channel store. If that's a request, then we would consider that.
Cool. Excellent. David Cooper asks, are there any plans to integrate with any IDE or have all the tool sets unified together with the profiler? Also, it'd be great to have comparison view of 2 sessions. So it sounds like a good RFE.
Yeah. So obviously we can't comment on any plans that we might have. There are some open source tools out there that do integrate some of these things. I don't know of one that integrates the profiler at the moment. And comparison view of 2 sessions, do you mean like 2? If you could add a follow-up question, do you mean 2 saved sessions and then compare them side by side? For instance, would it be sufficient to have just 2 Roku Resource Monitors running with 2 loaded sessions, or is there some other comparison that you want to see?
And actually, I was going to ask David to raise his hand and actually speak, but I do not see the name listed in the attendees. So in Zoom. So we may have to move on. All right. Brian asks, can you explain memory leaks with texture memory? How would that happen since we don't handle that ourselves?
So effectively the texture memory, what you'll find happens is it reaches a peak and you don't have a lot of control over that. What you really want, what you really are looking for, the most important thing in that particular graph is the system memory that's in use. If you're using system memory, then you've got some problems. But if you're using a significant amount of system memory, you should definitely look into that. Otherwise, for most channels, that graph doesn't provide necessarily a lot of actionable information. It can be useful to know if the number climbs up really quickly, then maybe you've got another issue there.
Well, I think you can get.
But again, when you talk about memory leaks in particular, so the question was about memory leaks. It's really the only time you get the memory leaks is if it's in system memory, because that's memory that's just not being used. It's, and I don't know if you technically would call it a leak, but if it's memory that's been loaded into system memory and you're just not using it, then it could be called a leak. It's not necessary, and you should try to figure out where that is, where you're loading posters that you're not actually displaying.
So I think you might be able to get texture thrashing rather than leak.
Right. So what Luke mentions there is sometimes you notice if you've got too many posters on the screen, too big, or they'll flash, and then you get the texture thrash. Unfortunately, I don't think Roku Resource Monitor really will show that. It can be interesting information, but the thrash is, as Luke mentions, the thrashing is definitely more important than the total amount of memory being used.
Okay, so back to David's question, he was stating what his scenario he was talking about was two side-loaded sessions side by side.
So yes, this has been asked before. Right now, the solution would be you can run Roku Resource Monitor twice and load two different sessions, so you can view them side by side in that way. Currently, that's the only way it's supported.
All right, developers, from Stephen again. Developers may have access to the key, but not the admin Roku account that manages the published channels. Can Roku Resource Monitor be used with any channels keyed the same as the device, or only on devices associated with the publishing account?
So I'm a firmware developer, so I can answer this from the firmware. I don't know about, and maybe someone else can answer that specific question, but as long as you've got the key that signed the package, then on the device, you can only have one key on the device at a time, then you can view those channels. So, and I'm not sure if you say a publishing account, I thought that typically only had one key, but I don't know. So I'm sorry, I just really can't answer this question. It's if the key on the device matches the key that the package was signed with, you can look at it. As how that relates to the publishing account, I'm not certain. That's kind of beyond the firmware.
Yeah, Stephen, we can kind of get back to you on that one if you need more further clarification.
Yeah, I think it should work with any channel that's keyed with the same device ID. I don't think it knows anything about the publishing account.
Thank you, Luke. Well, do we have any other questions? While we're waiting, sort of last call for questions, I can kind of drop this little Easter egg for the attendees since you guys did a great job showing up. Next big event that we're going to have is going to be the Roku Developer Summit. And it's going to be virtual again this year. And the dates are November 1st and November 2nd. The official announcement is coming. Should be any day, but at least I want to let you guys know. You kind of save the dates. I'm sorry. November 1st, November 2nd, 9 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, start time both days. We will have obviously our typical keynote and once again our series of panels and workshops. For this developer summit, there's going to be a couple new panels. One's going to be on search, as far as why you want to make sure your channel is in search and the sort of related benefits of being in search, how to create a feed, upload it, validate it, best practices. So that'll be kind of fun. We're gonna have a dedicated session for developer tools. So talking more about the resource monitor, ECP commands. And of course, we're gonna have our traditional, what I think is typically the highlight of the Dev Summit is our scene graph panel. So there might be a few other surprises too. So we do have one more question from Marcelo. He asks, when will 11.5 be widely rolled out? I have no devices yet on this firmware. The rollout is in progress. I can get back to you just to see. And the other thing we could probably do is, if you are on signed up for the beta program, you could have already been. Marcel, I will let's talk offline and see what we can do for you. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. I don't think we have anything else. I want to thank everyone for attending today, and also thank our panelists for helping out, Jeff and Saket and Luke. I appreciate it. Stay tuned for further updates on the Roku Developer Summit. News is forthcoming. So I thank you all very much. Have a great day.